to be on. Hey, we got it. Well done, Femke. Congratulations. Figured it out. Wonderful. So, as I was saying, my work in this space led to an invitation to be on the working group on sustainability for ICOM, where I was the secretary for 5 years, and then eventually led to the founding of the nonprofit organization Key Culture, which is an advocacy and resource organization. And then additionally, Key Futures, which is what I like to call our action branch, where we provide programming and community projects to help support the implementation of sustainable actions. So, today I want to talk to you a little bit about climate control and about loan agreements, as this has been more or less my entire world for the past 4 years. So, I do have a presentation. I know that we are a lot today, but of course, if you have any questions, please feel free to jump in or feel free to share in the chat. Also, of course, if you'd like to ask a question in Dutch, please go ahead and type that into the chat. That's not a problem. And of course, we'll have time for Q&A at the end of the presentation. All right. So I'm going to share my screen here. Hopefully you guys can see everything. And let's see here. There we go. Present. All right. Everyone can see that okay, I hope? Perfect. So I've already introduced myself, so let's get into the good stuff. Climate control, what it is and how we got here. As I mentioned, I have a doctorate in art conservation. I have been studying this for a very long time at cultural institutions and universities in the UK, Italy, and the Netherlands, as well as the United States. And it wasn't until I really focused on climate control as an wider issue that I learned a lot of things that I didn't know about this issue. Because climate control, which we understand to be the regulation of temperature and relative humidity in an indoor environment, um, is something that has really only been recently implemented in museums. If we think about it, climate control started with the invention of the HVAC system, the heating, ventilation, and air conditioning systems, which happened in the 1950s and 1960s. So, actually, if we look at climate control and the progress of implementation of climate control, it really only started in the mid 20th century. And if we think about this in context of our collections, which have been around for a lot longer, this is a relatively new phenomenon. And if we look at the progress of this implementation over the course of the past 70 years, it really is quite amazing how much has happened in such a short amount of time. Of course, as we know, in the 1960s and 1970s, the first publications came out about climate control in the context of preventive conservation. And this was from the research of Dr. Henry Plendereth, as well as Gary Thompson, who was the preventive conservator at the National Gallery in London. And we absolutely love Gary. I have nothing bad to say about him, but there was a little bit of a misunderstanding about the publication that he put out into the world. Basically, what happened was there was a table in the back of the book that had these beautiful magical numbers. And once we look at those numbers, we think that those are the standard, that those are the golden standard that we're all trying to achieve. But what we might fail to realize is that that is actually specific to Gary's context. That is actually something that is meant for the National Portrait Gallery in London in the 1970s. But all of a sudden, museums around the globe were clamoring to get those ideal conditions in their institutions, disregarding the context of their materials, their history of their collections, their geographic location, or their building's capacity. So we got into this situation where we were really trying to achieve the almost impossible and maintaining these really strict, rigid conditions, which were not meant for our collections. What's also really interesting about what happened with Gary Thompson's ranges was that we were looking at this plus or minus two as what is tolerable, when in actuality, what that was indicating was what was expected or what could be achieved with an HVAC system. When Gary made these numbers, he said it's not realistic for an HVAC system to be able to control a building and keep it at a certain temperature all the time. That's just never going to happen. We know that's never going to happen. So his range, ±2, ±5, was what he thought was realistic for the performance, for the ability of the HVAC system. Now, I don't know about you, but as someone who studied art conservation for more than 8 years, I was shocked to learn this. And I heard this from the horse's mouth. It was Gal de Gachon, who was a friend of Gary Thompson's and was there for the entire discussion around the development of these preventive conservation parameters, who told me this when I had an aperitivo with him at his apartment in Rome. So this was pretty mind-blowing for me. And then what was really interesting was that while we were rushing to implement these unrealistic and unnecessary standards, we all of a sudden started realizing that this was not only something that was almost impossible, but also really detrimental to the environment. In the early 2000s, museums started rethinking what this meant in terms of energy consumption and in terms of carbon footprint. In 2008, publications started coming out about the concerns of the environmental footprint of museums. And in 2014, the Bezo Green Protocol and the ICOM CC and IIC Joint Declaration came out stating that rigid parameters were not necessary and supporting the implementation of wider parameters. So fast forward to 2026. 2026, Happy New Year, everyone, where we actually are starting to not only realize that we have all of the scientific data that we need to support making these changes, but actually people are starting to do it. So when we're thinking about the new standards and the new practices around climate control, what's really important is to alleviate some of the fear around making these changes. I've told you 6 times, I'll tell you again, I'm an art conservator. I know how scary this can be. And I know that the weight of the world is on our shoulders as custodians of our heritage. But the fact of the matter is that scientific evidence shows that broader environmental parameters does not compromise the safety of most collections. This is a direct quote from Michael Lumosky and Cecilia Winter, two head researchers at the Getty Conservation Institute. And what's so interesting is that when we're actually looking at best practice, we are not looking at a set of standard numbers. We are looking at contextualizing climate control for our institutions based on our collections. And of course, what's so exciting about this is that by making these changes, we're not only achieving best practice in terms of our collections care and our conservation, but we're actually saving carbon, reducing our energy, and saving money. So this is really a win-win-win. On top of that, by updating our climate control parameters, we're making our collections more accessible. So it not only has a economic and environmental sustainability benefit, it also has a social sustainability benefit. So I wanted to get some clarity around some of these new words that are being thrown around in these conversations around climate control. The first term you've probably heard, because I also just mentioned it, is BEZO. The Bezo Green Protocol was first created, as I mentioned, in 2014 and then was revamped and updated in 2023. And what's so exciting about Bezo is that it is an international protocol which helps to support greener practices and green first in museum world. Bezo is adopted widely, not only by international audiences, but by the top museums around the globe. And Bezo, the new refresh in 2023, has been scientifically supported by the research at the Getty Conservation Institute. So I wanted to kind of unpack a couple of the key quotes from Bezo here. So this is one of the quotes from the new Bezo protocol. You don't have to read the entire thing. I've read it for you and I've memorized it, but this is my most important takeaways. What is really important is that when we're talking about Bezo, they do give you a starting off point in that 40 to 60%, 16 to 25 ranges. But what is so important to understand is that those numbers do not have any fundamental meaning from a scientific point of view. The reason for that is that while, yes, there is material science that supports that this is really tolerable for most collections, everything that we know about our collections is that our collections are unique. What's best for my collection may not be best for your collection, even if we have the same type of collection. Gael de Gauchon, when I was with him, was telling me a story that really blew my mind. He was doing a research project in Egypt and went down to a tomb in the middle of the desert, and he was examining the condition of a collection of ivory. And he did a condition report and examined the collection, and it was in excellent condition, been there for, 3,000 plus years, but it was still in great shape. He measured the relative humidity within that tomb where he was examining the collection, and it was 30%. So really, really dry. But the collection was fine. And it was because, of course, the ivory was used to those conditions. That was normal for it. It had acclimated to that condition, and it was very happy there. A couple months later, Gael was at a museum in Brazil, and their storage was in the basement, and it was very damp. There was actually water dripping in from the ceiling, and he was examining another collection, again, of ivory statues at this museum in Brazil. The collection was in great shape. It was very happy. It was not seeing and showing any signs of damage, mold. There was no issues. Had been there for a very long time and in these very wet conditions. He measured the relative humidity, 80%. This is what is so fascinating about collections. I mean, art objects are like people, right? We're not going to treat every single person in the same way because everyone has different needs. Collections are the same way. The ivory, the material science behind ivory will tell you that there's a certain preferred relative humidity, but the context has to be taken into consideration. If an object is used to a certain type of condition, then that's what's best for it. And in this particular situation, we saw ivory that was very good condition at 30% and ivory that was in very good condition at 80%. So this is what we mean by there are no magic numbers. The other thing that's really important is that we're not trying to find magic numbers. And I know that that sounds like a lot more work for us. It is so much easier if we can just point at a table in a book and say, these are the magic numbers, and we'll call it a day. But actually, what we need to be doing is using our knowledge and our expertise to figure out what is best for our collections based on the context, on the condition of the objects, on the type of objects, on the history of the objects, on our buildings, on our geographic location, and on our facilities. So it does take a little extra work, but it really is best practice to think about what our collections need, not what Gary Thompson's collections needed in the 70s in London. All right, so now that we know that it's okay and it's safe to update our climate control, we're going to see who's doing this and then how. When we're talking about updating practices, this is something that is universally accepted. It was actually really interesting. I was doing an article with a reporter from the New York Times a couple of years ago when we did our first International Climate Control Conference. And he was asking me about this tension around updating climate control practices in museums. And he said, okay, Caitlin, I get your point of view. We can update climate control. It's safe to do. Museums should be doing this. And he said, so who's on the other side? Is there anyone that says that it's not a good idea to update? Is there anyone who feels that they should not touch that dial? And I said, to be honest with you, I don't know. And he said, okay, well, I'm going to go find out. And after a couple of months, he called me and he said, I'm dropping this story. He said, there's no one that says that it's a bad idea to update. And he said, even the people who used to say it was a bad idea have changed their mind. So, what's really amazing is that this is something we all agree is time to do and it's safe to do. If you look at leading national and international organizations, they're all on the same page. AIC, the Canadian Conservation Institute, ICOM CC, IIC, the Getty Conservation Institute, all have published information about updated practices. And actually, within the last few months, English Heritage has come out with a 35 to 65% relative humidity recommendation, which is even broader than the BESO guidelines. So everyone's really on the same page with this. And what's really exciting is that we're starting to see the change taking shape. The Rijksmuseum has been implementing energy efficiency strategies for more than 10 years. They started with HVAC system shutdowns. If you guys have not heard of HVAC system shutdowns, this is a great place to start with your energy efficiency journey. Basically, the idea is that your HVAC does not need to be running 24/7, especially if your museum is closed, because what actually is affecting the temperature and relative humidity is the doors opening and shutting and people being in the galleries. If there's no one in the galleries, if the museum is outside of operating hours, then your building can self regulate to an extent, meaning that by shutting off your HVAC system, you won't see crazy temperature and relative humidity fluctuations. We're going to get into a little case study from the Statens Museum of Kunst in Copenhagen in just a minute, and I'll tell you more about that. Now, Rijksmuseum is busy with the implementation of BISO, and it's really exciting to see how much progress they've made in such a short amount of time. So, Rijksmuseum is doing it. We can all do it, right? All right. So, one of the things that we noticed when it came to these implementations is that there were a couple of barriers. As I've mentioned, we've had the scientific research and knowledge for more than 25 years that it is safe to update. And we've had all of these national and international organizations saying, go for it. This is a good idea. We've had museums signing on to BISO, but then we have had little action. And the biggest problems, the biggest barriers that we've seen to implementing updated practices are basically, how you do it. There's a time issue. It's, you have to actually put in a lot of work to figure out what you're going to be doing. And then the other thing is loan agreements. So we thought it would be really helpful to design a program that can help support museums in the process for updating their climate control conditions. So we started a project called Getting Climate Control Under Control. We partnered with the Danish Museum Association and 10 member museums in Denmark. And we walked them through the process of identifying where their current climate control and energy efficiency status was, where they wanted to go, and then how to get there. And then over the course of 18 months, we implemented testing and changes at these 10 museums. We saw all 10 museums save between 10 and 50% on their energy consumption. Not only did we update climate control parameters and energy efficiency practices and policies, but we also went through and updated our loan practices. What is so interesting about this project is that we noticed that each museum had a different approach. But what was so exciting is that as the museums were working together, they were able to support each other and help to give advice on how to implement things. A great example is the Odense Museum and the SMK, the Statens Museum for Kunst. And SMK had been using BISO for 10 years. They were one of the first adapters, and they had had a lot of success with implementing BISO and using it once again for the past 10 years. So these other museums that were a little bit nervous about expanding their parameters could ask SMK about their experience and how it was going, and had that reassurance of a case study that was very successful. Conversely, SMK decided during the project to start implementing HVAC system shutdowns. Odense Museum had been doing HVAC system shutdowns for years, and they saved 50% on their energy consumption by turning off their HVAC system for 12 hours a day. SMK started doing these experiments as well. SMK started with 3-hour nightly shutdowns, and then they went to 6 hours, and then they went to 12 hours. And if you watch their case study, which I'll share the link for, you can see that actually it didn't really affect their temperature and relative humidity to an extreme amount. And actually, it was, I think, 1 or 2 degrees was the only deviation. So it kept enough of a flat line. Actually, it kept a very nice flat line. It was even flatter than during the day, that they felt very comfortable implementing HVAC system shutdowns in their gallery spaces. So this is really a way that we can help to not only support each other in terms of peer-to-peer knowledge exchange, but actually feel comfortable doing it because we're all doing it together. After the success of the Danish collaboration, we collaborated with ICOM France and we launched a cohort in France. We're working with 10 museums across the country to update their loan agreements and their climate control practices and energy efficiency. We also have worked with museums across North America as well as galleries. The Portland Museum of Art implemented BESO in 6 weeks. They went really quickly. I have to say, the Rijksmuseum, it's taken a little bit longer. Portland is a much smaller building, of course, so it was very easy for them to just say, this is how we're going to do it. They basically added 2 degrees every day or every week and then saw how things went and then waited for a week and then they went and added a little bit more. So they expanded over the course of 6 weeks from ±2 to ±10, and there was no impact on their collections. Their energy savings varies depending on the day and the season, of course, but it's between 20 and 80% in some days. Royal Ontario Museum in Canada also has been working on updating their facilities operations, and they've been able to really collaborate better across departments and working with collections care and facilities to understand what the climate is doing and what it needs to be doing. They are also implementing wider parameters as well as experimenting with HVAC system shutdowns. And the Hauser and Wirth galleries, we just finished their second project in their Menorca gallery, where we saved 45% of energy in their gallery spaces. So what's really exciting, of course, is that we can see that this is very impactful and it's very quickly impactful. But I wanted to very quickly, I realize I'm running a little bit out of time here, but I wanted to very quickly address the elephant in the room, which is loan agreements. Many institutions that I've discussed updating climate control conditions with have said that they're happy to do it. It's safe for their collections, but they're worried about loan agreements and they're worried about being excluded from loans in the future because of updating their practices. So, one of the really interesting things when we start delving into loan agreements is that when you look at a loan agreement, at least for me as a conservator, I originally would look at a loan agreement as a set of instructions. But I realized when I started actually doing research on this that loan agreements are not instructions. A loan agreement is a contract, which means that it is basically the outline of the mutually beneficial partnership between two parties. It is meant to be a a document that outlines roles and responsibilities, not a document that tells you what you have to do. So it's really important for us to understand that loan agreements can be negotiated, that loan agreements can be changed, and that they are not set in stone. And that actually, at the end of the day, we're all trying to achieve the same thing. If I'm a museum and I'm loaning something out, I'm not trying to make that loan not happen by giving you unrealistic standards. We all want this loan to happen. And the loan agreement is supposed to just basically be the document that everyone agrees to in order to make it happen. It's not something that should be a barrier. So when we look at loan agreements, I've been studying this now for the last 3 years, and it's really interesting because a lot of times we're using templates that are either outdated or they have been adopted from a different institution, which means they're not really relevant for us. I worked with a museum in the US and I was asking them when their loan agreement was originally written. And the registrar I was talking to said he didn't know. And I said, do you know who wrote it? And he said he didn't know. And I asked him how long he'd worked at the museum. And he said 20 years. And I found it kind of amazing that this person had been working at this museum for 20 years and using the same loan agreement template, which he didn't even know the origins of or really what it said. If we're looking at loan agreements, we are once again needing to look at what is right for our collections and our objects. We're not trying to make these ideal conditions that was set by somebody that is not us, because we're the ones who knows what is ideal for our collections. So there are three practices that I really like to advocate for with loan agreements and rewriting loan agreements. One is what I call, one is an appendix. Basically, the easiest way to update your loan agreements is to just take all of the specifics, the numbers for your climate control, the numbers for your lumens, the ideas around couriering, things like that. Take it out of the body of the contract and put it in an appendix. Still have a clause saying for climate control requirements, see Appendix 1, and then for each individual object, you can make the requirements that are specific to that object. That's best practice in so many ways, because that is tailoring your loan agreement to your specific context, to the needs of the collection. Now, I understand that at a lot of institutions that's not possible because we don't have the capacity to write a different loan agreement for every object. So there are a lot of other ways that we can approach this. You can always refer to international practices or BISO. In Denmark, what we ended up doing is all of the museums that we worked with now refer to BISO. They state that they expect BISO protocol as a requirement for a loan agreement. And that's easy enough because BISO gives a lot of wiggle room. We know that there are some numbers thrown in there, but we actually know that what BISO means is contextualizing climate control to your specific institution. So this gives a lot of wiggle room there. The other thing that I like to say for our loan agreements is what I call the reciprocity clause. And that basically means instead of me telling you what to do, I'm going to be telling you what I'm doing. So instead of saying we require X, Y, and Z, you will say we practice X, Y, and Z. And so for the best preservation of our collections, we expect something similar. All right, that's enough of me talking. I'm seeing lots of activity in the chat, so I'm going to stop sharing my screen here. And I would love to open up the floor for any questions if you guys have any.
Thank you so much, Caitlin. I thought that was very, you always think, oh, I know BISO, yeah, I've heard of it, I know what's up, but I've heard lots of new things, and also the 12-hour shutdowns. Oh my God, such
Yeah,
savings.
yeah, and it's really interesting because when we were doing the testing with SMK, they found that the 3-hour shutdowns didn't provide enough. It actually was more energy intensive because you shut the machine down, and then of course there's a spike in the energy consumption when you turn it back on. So 3-hour shutdowns didn't work at all. 8-hour shutdowns they were fine. I mean, there was no effect on the temperature, relative humidity, but they could push it further. And 12-hour ended up being the ideal number. It was, which I was also very impressed by.
Yeah, it's so interesting. Okay, if we go to the questions, Dirtska had a question, but it was answered straight away by yourself.
Well,
Uh,
if you'd like an elaboration, Tetska, please let me know.
and Wopke, maybe you'd like to ask your question or your thoughts, share your thoughts straight away on screen.
Yes, that's fine. Let's see if I can open my camera. No, oh. Well, can you hear me?
Yes, yes,
Okay,
thank you.
great. Hi.
Hi, nice to see
Hi.
you.
Nice to see you. Yeah, I was wondering because we're talking about we have very strict climate questions in our loan agreement, and we are discussing this, of course, at our museum. But we're also one of the lucky ones with a very nice climate system. So,
Which museum are you?
oh, sorry, Keulen Museum in Otterlo, in the Netherlands.
Right.
And at this moment, we can provide a very stable climate, which also it is of course interesting to learn where these conditions come from, the 20+2 and my you know what you described at the beginning, but we can hold those more or less. So that's also what's in our loan agreement, because we say our collection is in our museum. This is what our collection has been used to for years and years. So at this moment, we feel this is best for our collection, but we lend a lot to other borrowers, to other museums, and they all now say, oh, we do BISO 4060 RH, and the temperature and the changes of 10% per day and 24 hours. But there is how do we handle this? Because we have this very narrow climate window in which we operate at the moment. And if we're going to lend to another museum that does that has an RH at 45% and it has a 5% or maybe more a change within 24 hours, what will it do to our collection? Or maybe it goes to the 60%. So there's a bit of, we're very hesitant we want to change our loan agreements, but yeah, it's what you said. What's best for our collection?
Yeah. No, that's an excellent question. And I think it's a really important one because, and this is something that I have to say we see a lot in Northern Europe because in temperate climates like in the Netherlands or in Denmark, we're able to, and this, once again, this is what happened with the origin of these numbers is that it was London. And like we can keep those kind of temperate ranges. But in the rest of the world, you mentioned Brazil in your comment, like that's not possible. So there are two things that I think are important to take into consideration around this. One thing, and I know that Kröller-Müller has a lot of modern and contemporary artwork, so that's one thing to take into consideration. But if you have collections that have been in your institution even before climate control, then they will have experienced what's called proofed fluctuations. And you know what proofed fluctuations are, but just for anyone on the call who doesn't know what proofed fluctuations are, basically the idea is that if an object has already experienced a certain climatic condition, so a temperature and relative humidity range or point, any damage that would have happened will have already occurred. So if you have a panel painting and it's from Brussels and it's used to, going through that range of 30 to 60% and the temperature between, 14 degrees and 18 degrees because it's been in the basement of some church for the last 200 years, then then any damage from those ranges, from those climates will have already occurred. So if an object gets in that climate again, even if it's been in climate control for the last 50 years, no more damage will occur. So anything that has already been exposed to those ranges is more or less going to be safe to travel. But of course, we want to be extra cautious. So it's always important to make sure that there is an understanding of the history of the collection or of the object specifically, and then see if that's something that would be a discussion point. Now, of course, if the object is sensitive or if it has never been exposed to that, if it's a contemporary artwork and it's only ever been at the Kröller-Müller in these smaller parameters, then you might need to be thinking about other options. And that might be microclimates. That might be a way to look at maintaining something that's more, let's say, favorable or more used to that collection, that object. But the other thing that I think is really interesting is the idea of acclimation. And I was talking to the head of conservation at the National Museum of Lagos in Nigeria, and we were talking about the climate conditions there. And of course, they don't have energy 24/7 and they maybe 3 hours a day. And so they don't have climate control. And it's very normal to be 30 degrees and 70% relative humidity. And their collections are all fine. Of course, they're used to that. But they do a lot of international loans and they send their objects to Connecticut and to London and to all kinds of very cold places. And I asked, okay, I said, so what do you do? Like, isn't that a shock to the system for these objects that have never experienced cold? And she says, yes, but we just go through an acclimation period. So the object will go and it will sit for 2 weeks in an acclimation hub, and then it will slowly get used to these new conditions. And what I asked her, which I thought was very interesting, and as I said, well, that's amazing that you're able to do this. Do these museums ever send anything to you? And she goes, oh, of course not. So it's also really, really socially inaccessible that it's okay for those museums to be sending us things that there could potentially be a risk for acclimation, but the Western society won't send that way. So I feel like it's worth having a conversation in terms of just social impact. And happy to expand on any of that, but I hope that answers your question.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Tjitske also commented, I'm sure that the situation in most artist practices over the centuries has not been.
It's a great point.
Yeah. I think what I'd like to do is go over to Annika now, and then we'll get back to talking more about your presentation as well and any other questions we have. If that's okay, I just saw one or two questions, but maybe let me see.
I can answer those in the chat while Annika's talking. I want to make sure to
Okay,
give her.
yeah, let's try that. Okay,
Perfect.
I will see if I can highlight Annika. I'm getting really good at Zoom today.
Thank you. Thank you, Femke. And I also actually just had a very quick question for Caitlin, which was around cost savings, that some of the, she mentioned some percentages of energy savings, but can you just give us a quick indication of what that translates to in terms of the cost savings, Caitlin?
That's a really good question. It's depends on the institution, of course, but some of the institutions reported 6,000 euro in savings on an annual basis. But the Guggenheim Bilbao in Spain, they updated their practices from ±2 to ±5, and they saved 20,000 euro a month on their energy consumption. So there's some massive savings to be had here.
Absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah,
I can
thank you for
imagine.
that question. Great point.
Sure. So I will start by introducing myself. I am also a conservator, an art conservator, and I trained in London at Camberwell College of Art in organic and paper conservation. And I worked at St. Paul's Cathedral and the Royal Horticultural Society and their art collection before then moving on to Tate. And so when I was at Tate, I, thought I was getting my dream job, but unfortunately, I became really bogged down in paperwork, and also bureaucracy and politics. And I sort of realized about myself that this large institution that was full of all of these things wasn't really the best place for me. But also kind of in parallel with that, the iPad was launched back in the Christmas of 2010. And at the same time, we actually had a brainstorming day session of the entire department. There's about 40 of us. And we were brainstorming about how we could streamline our conservation documentation processes, because it was acknowledged that they were pretty unwieldy, and there was a lot of paper pushing going on, and unfortunately, actually, to the point where we had very, very little time for actual conservation treatment. I don't know if that resonates with anyone else here, but I was very saddened by the fact that I had trained for years. I was in this world-class institution. I had masterpieces on my bench, and instead I had to go deal with a lot of paperwork. And especially condition reports. I, as a paper conservator, was doing thousands of condition reports every year. They had a very active acquisition program. I had to do lots of condition reports for that. There was also a very active, touring exhibition and loans program, and I had to do many, many, many condition reports for those. And so, I felt like here I am, I'm in this world-class institution, and also like the process of condition reporting itself is very painful. In fact, the introduction of a digital camera, if anything, kind of in a way made it worse, because I was taking thousands of digital images, but I was still writing the report by hand. I was drawing little diagrams with a little key that says, squiggly line means tear for me today. It was completely unstandardized. It was very confused by the fact that I was taking digital images that would be uploaded in their thousands to a network drive. We couldn't even afford to print them all out, so they weren't together with the rest of the report. And if you needed to actually refer to this stuff later on, you'd be in real trouble, because you might have to then access this network drive where they've just dumped thousands of images of a section of abstract painting. You're trying to find compare and marry these things, and it would be extremely time consuming and problematic. And in theory, we were supposed to scan and upload all these condition reports into our collection management system, but nobody ever had time to do that. It never happened. In theory, sometimes we were supposed to print off some of these images to then attach to the paper record, but again, people didn't have the time or the money to do all that often. And then people would also have to photocopy, keep a copy for their, institution for a touring exhibition context, have things in folders, traveling with exhibitions, have photocopies, which were difficult to read and illegible. And sometimes, you had handwritten notes in multiple languages you couldn't read or decipher. And so it was messy. It was stressful. It was a, just a whole like problematic process because it was not ideal at all in any sense. And so
not very sustainable.
No, yeah, exactly. It was a frustrating process. And so when the iPad came out, we were all like, ooh, the tablet will replace the clipboard and we'll finally have a better process, which will be more efficient and in which we can, just like do better, right? And so Articheck started off by being a research project where I interviewed the heads of section of conservation at Tate and then expanded my interviews to try and understand, what sort of specification a digital condition reporting tool would need to have. And I also realized in that process that there was an appetite not only to streamline, but also to I'm sorry, hold on. It's just one second. I'm sorry. There is a toddler toy making a bunch of noise that's very distracting. Sorry, my toddler. So there was an appetite not only for streamlining, which would give us all more bench time, which was, a wonderful goal, but also an appetite for just improving the protection of, which after all, the reason for doing condition reports, right, let's remember, is to better protect and reduce risks for artwork and museum objects, especially as they might be undergoing higher risks associated with transit for loans or exhibitions or display. And that would be, those outcomes would be improved if we could have better clarity, if we could have better processes, if we could have a better, system and utilize technology, right? I was really excited by the idea of harnessing technology so that instead of having a box of analog papers that you would then, send off site to some storage facility, never to be seen again, if you actually had like a beautiful standardized data set and a database, then you could, in fact, analyze it, you could question it, you could utilize it, you could do something with this data for these condition reports instead of simply, it kind of going to waste and people just doing it for the sake of a requirement by an insurance company. Or, a bureaucratic sort of requirement that then, nothing is harnessed or done with that information. And so that was the kind of original inspiration for me to start Articheck as a company. I attended a bunch of startup events and started to understand, what does a business plan look like? How do I find technical people and how do I communicate with technical people? How do I sort of let people know, market this thing? How does this all happen? And how do I finance it? How do I meet investors who would like to invest in a business like this? So I went through a process, a very steep learning curve of understanding how to kind of make this thing happen. And I founded Articheck back in 2012 is when I got the funding, or when I met my original investor and mentor. And then in 2013, he invested and I built a prototype and got some beta trialers. And then I did like a proper round of funding in 2014. And then I was able to kind of build, the system and launch it. And now fast forward like a decade and we have now millions of reports in our system. It's used by just under, I think, about 400 different organizations globally. In terms of museums, we're especially popular in America. That's where we have the strongest museum community using us. But we also work a lot with galleries and with shippers and private collections and kind of all, the whole ecosystem of condition reporting, and we now have a very mature system. And so I'm very proud of it, but also very keen on always kind of improving it and looking at how we can kind of utilize and harness technology to make it better and better and more useful. One of the things, for example, that I'm keen to do is to have like a dashboard where people can indeed interrogate that data, much better, and learn about priorities for their collection. I know a lot of people working with their collections can get overwhelmed because it's really hard to know, the current condition of your whole collection, and what to do with that information. So that's
I
something,
think
for example.
I think Annika, it would be interesting if you could later share the link to Articheck and everything you do,
Okay, sure.
for anyone who's interested in, well, devising a new system for their paperwork behind the collections, because that's really what your expertise is. And
Sure,
so
yeah.
is the virtual courier, I find that a really difficult word, virtual courier, is it part of your, was this automatic sort of following from your condition report system, or is it something that happened over COVID, or how did you get into that?
It was a COVID innovation. In fact, you are quite right, Femke. And what happened was, but just before COVID, I had my own little epiphany, just like Caitlin with her in Rapa Nui. I had my little aha moment actually in front of the National Gallery in London when I was protesting with Extinction Rebellion about the climate emergency. And I was thinking, National Gallery has this massive carbon footprint. Nobody here really knows or understands about that. Rather than just being a body in a protest, maybe I can help lead my industry into more sustainable practices. And so I started to look at the biggest kind of points, categories of carbon footprint for most museums and art organizations, which is staff travel, buildings, and freight. And so I wanted to support transitions of more sustainable practices in those three areas, really focus our efforts there. And then I got an opportunity to do that over COVID, only about a year later, when nobody could travel. And so I thought, okay, well, this is sort of the moment to develop something that would really allow people to remotely oversee transit and the risks associated with transit. And so we sort of broadened from just condition reporting and conservation documentation to really thinking of ourselves more as like a risk management platform, I guess you could say. And so, and acknowledging the fact, we work a lot with insurers, and they say, 70% of damage happens in transit. So you should really do a lot of focus and effort on, managing that risk point of transit. And so it seemed also to be very in line with our mission and what we want to do, which is to really utilize technology to help improve risk management, essentially, and to streamline processes around that. And so we developed this product of a virtual courier, and that, again, is all about overseeing these risk points virtually. And so working with, for example, if you're talking about a loan or a touring exhibition, you have different opportunities for documentation of these kind of higher risk points, but you don't necessarily have to be there in the room physically. You can be, a shipper or a borrower or someone can kind of document the fact that the agreed protocols from the loan agreement are being followed, or from the shipping instructions, they're being followed, or the installation instructions, or the packing instructions, or whatever the kind of parameters are that you've all agreed. This is how we're going to do. This is how we're going to protect this thing. You can demonstrate that through video, through photographs, through audio, through streaming, through a combination of ways of doing and documenting that those things are in place. And so what I will do now is, if I can share my screen, let me just see if I can do that. Okay. Right. Can everyone see my screen? Great. Okay.
And
so
just to remind us ourselves, so it's 12 o'clock now. Maybe some people need to be leaving, but those who are staying, wonderful. So after your presentation, Annika will have room for discussion and to share a bit more. So I hope you'll be around.
Great. So I have a couple of case studies here, and I think probably the best place to start is going to be actually this one. So this is the case study about the Design Museum in London. They had an exhibition, and they saved 26 days of staff time and around $11,000 in using virtual courier for this exhibition. And so essentially what they wanted to do, and here's a little quote from the exhibition's manager at the Design Museum, which is about the fact, and Transit Hub is, virtual courier is like a part of Transit Hub, which is like a module within Articheck. And so, and she talks about how it seems to have, great potential, even though it's born of the pandemic. It would actually be a really good thing to think about using in the longer term because of the fact that it saves money and it's more sustainable. And that, it was great to kind of have the opportunity to use it while restrictions were in place, but that, her hope was that it could kind of carry on. And so here are some of the different organizations that we worked with for that exhibition. Crozier was the shipping partner. Plowden and Smith is a conservation studio that was doing the condition reporting. Chenu was one of the shippers in Europe because a lot of the loans came from France and also from Germany and Switzerland. So Kraft and Chenu were the sort of European shipping partners. And Crozier was the London-based Martin Speed. They purchased Martin Speed, which was the London-based shipping partner at the time. And so we also calculated that although this was not a touring exhibition, if it was a touring exhibition and it went to another 2 venues, then it would be, even a more significant cost savings and more significant amount of courier time that would be saved. So those are things to just take into consideration, right? And another thing that I want to mention is referencing another case study, which was done by 24 Ora Cultura, which is an Italian institution. They did a case study on a traveling exhibition on Frida Kahlo, and they discovered that couriers actually made up 75% of the emissions of the exhibition, which I think is surprising to a lot of people. In their case, they had a lot of couriers, and they had like a map showing them all kind of like looping the globe. And of course, this is something that really highly varies depending on the project and the situation, but it can be very significant. It can be significant both in terms of I've heard about exhibition budgets. It can be, half of the operating cost of an exhibition budget can be spent on couriers. And 75% of the carbon footprint can be spent on couriers. So, it's really significant and it's really worth thinking about. And something maybe we can talk about afterwards is that one of the concerns that I've heard, especially from European institutions, is a concern that, well, if we start doing it on some things, it'll be a slippery slope. And pretty soon the expectation of the management will be that we do it on everything and we won't have the opportunity to choose, where we do it and how we do it. And so I think that's maybe a potential barrier or a blocker that is worth kind of further discussion. But the nutshell of my view on it personally is, things don't have to be so binary of like, we do everything by virtual courier or we do everything by human courier and, it's all or nothing. But so another concern that a lot of people have is around insurance. How will my insurers feel about doing this? And so we had to say major insurance provider for the sake of our website because of their the insurers' policy around advertising this stuff. But this, I can tell you in this case, it was AXA. And Chris Bentley, who was the UK head of AXA Fine Art, basically was saying, you know, this whole thing about insurers won't let me do it is not really accurate. That essentially insurers generally are very supportive of museum professionals as being the experts who know how to safeguard their objects, and they are in support of whatever the museum professionals think is the way to do that. They are happy to accept that. And they, on the other hand, they also recognize the fact that the climate emergency is, you know, it's real, it's here, and it's creating increased risk, right? It's creating increased risk of natural disaster. You know, look at the wildfires in LA. Look at, you know, the increasing, you know, flooding in Florida. There's all kinds of examples of risks to collection that the climate emergency helps to create, and is only going to get worse over time. And we need to start factoring those into our considerations around risk management of collections. And so he said, ultimately, the insurance market wants to support any shift to more sustainable practices in acknowledgement of the fact that there will be potentially much more damage to all types of property due to climate change. So I think that's a really important concept that we all need to kind of embed into our thinking about these things. So here's a little image of, I'll just try and make that bigger. No, it's not working. Of you know, an excerpt from a digital condition report with some annotations and detailed images. And here is a little.
Annika, if I can just ask, so if I understand correctly, you've launched Transit Hub?
Yes.
Which is kind of a tool for museums who want to start using a virtual courier, or?
Yes. Yes.
Right.
So Transit Hub is a module within Articheck, so that to facilitate not just museums, but also galleries and auction houses and shippers and everyone in the sort of ecosystem to be able to utilize virtual courier sort of practices. And what this can be something as simple as shipment notifications. You know, this can be, in here we can see a little video. This is a video that someone from the Design Museum took of something arriving from a lender. So here you can see the name, Cleo Stringer, she signed it, it's dated, it's automatically tagged, it's automatically shared with the various key players. And you could see, you know, here is this crate arriving to my institution. And so you kind of just logging and documenting these kind of key points. And, you know, here is what it looks like from somebody's desktop computer or their mobile. You can easily add documents, images, videos. It will automatically take GPS location data. So it's everything is in one place. You can determine who has permissions to see what different types of information or documents. And so it's a way of you know, keeping everything together. I think I will just quickly show you a few more images. This is from another case study, and here is an airport check. So here's a video of things at the airport. You know, they've been palletized and they're being loaded onto an aircraft. So, you know, probably people in the virtual room here have experience of being a courier and being here in person for this scenario, for this kind of thing to take place. But in this case, you've got the shipper in MTAB, Denmark in this case, who is signing off and taking the video and showing, you know, here it is, it's fine, you're back in, you know, another country from the comfort of your home computer, viewing the fact that, you know, you've got an instant notification to say, this is where it's at right now in the world, this is the airport, this is, you know, this is all fine, essentially. You want to give people confidence to know that whatever things you've agreed for the sake of your object's protection, whatever protocols have been agreed are being followed. And you can kind of follow it again, you know, from the comfort of your armchair, what's happening with it. So that's the whole idea of virtual courier, and we have a platform which facilitates that essentially. So maybe in the interest of time, I should leave it there, and then we can have a discussion. If anybody has questions they want to ask, very happy to answer them.
That sounds great. And Caitlin, just confirming that insurance companies are very much on board with this whole change you're advocating. Let me see. There you go. Yeah, I'm interested. Is there anyone here in the room who has experience with virtual couriering themselves or as a receiving museum? I didn't actually, I found it quite hard to imagine how this kind of works, apart from sort of filming, hanging something. So this is very enlightening to see how you combine data like GPS and signing off and film and documenting, and how you combine all those different facets.
Yeah, we have basically, imagine it's an online collaboration secure space, right? Where you can share way bills, you can share loan agreements, you can have, control over who can see those things or who can edit those things or share those things. You can show, okay, the shipper has just uploaded a video of it's now in a warehouse overnight in Denmark or something, right? So you can see where it is in transit or in installation or in packing terms or deinstallation or, whatever it might be. And, indeed, in a lot of people, when they think of virtual couriering, think of the installation and, streaming videos at that point. That is, of course, the key and important point, but there's also lots. If you're looking at it a little bit more holistically, it's about like, what has the agreement been? What is, realistic? It's not just about how are we going to install this thing, but indeed, how are we going to unpack it? How are we going to pack it? How are we going to transport it? How is it being loaded? How is it being crated? There's all those kinds of aspects to it.
Titske, you have a question. I would like to suggest that those of you who want to put their cameras on, so Caitlin and Annika can see who you are, and put your hand up if you have a question. And just like Titske now, if you put your sound on.
Yes, the sound on. Well, I can see how it helps with the paperwork, of course. That might be very nice. But how about the recent situations with RE? Can you trust all these movies? Because I know when I film things, I know I only film what is good. I don't film what's going wrong. At least I will be very hesitate because, I know what's going wrong for the other party shouldn't be that dangerous for, you can solve problems. Huh?
It's interesting because I was thinking that as well. Of course, you only film or share the part where it goes well, but you don't film or you don't share the part where someone drops something. And also AI is an interesting addition to the problem. Yeah.
Sure. So let me address some of those questions. So first of all, with AI, so our platform works in such a way that in the system, in the application, whether you're on a mobile device or on your laptop or desktop computer or whatever, when you are you're taking video through the system, and so that's controlled. You're taking the video, and then it is saved and stored and shared with the right people. So basically, it doesn't allow you to therefore attach doctored video, because you have to take the video through the system, if that makes sense. And so that's one of the security protocols that helps to avoid tampering. Although I think that for the most cases, we do have a level of trust with our borrowers and lenders and shippers and everything. So, hopefully this is not something that people would do, but certainly there are technical ways to also overcome some of those risks, to reduce some of those kinds of risks. Now, another question was around, sharing the good stuff and not necessarily the bad stuff. And I think that that's a very interesting point. And I think if you are you talking about in the context of a virtual courier scenario, or are you talking in the context of where there is a human courier or there's no courier? So I think it's important to consider the context of those questions, because if you, for example, have a scenario where you've agreed to do a virtual courier sort of situation, then you probably have agreed at what points you're going to take and share video or images, or be in a streaming session together, or whatever it is. Is it something where as you say, things might not be going well, but you are intervening to correct them? Again, I think that speaks a lot to the whole trust between the borrower and the lender, right? If you have a good relationship, if you've developed that trust, then you might say to yourself, well, this thing I can see is going a little bit wrong, compared with what how we thought it would go, how it should go. I'm going to intervene and to fix it. And then I'm going to report to the lender my fix. I'm going to report that things are fine now because I've intervened and I've done something, and we can agree that it's a good thing that I did that, right? And so I think that concept can still hold when it comes to a virtual courier scenario, which is you would just document that fact. You would say, we agreed to do A, but I saw that actually that wasn't going to plan, and so instead I did B. Here's B. What do you think? And then they will get an instant notification and they can review it and they can say, oh, actually, you made a good decision there in doing B. Bravo, we'll do B next time because I think that should be the new A. Or they might say, actually, B sucks. I wish you hadn't done that. We need to do C. And then you can say, okay, I've done C. Here it is. What do you think? So it's, you're still having this conversation. It's just that you're doing, much like we are today, right? Wouldn't it be lovely if we could all be in a room together physically today? But that would be a lot to administer. That would be a lot to do. And probably, if we're honest, everybody here wouldn't be able to make it if it was in person. It would cost a lot more. It would take a lot more of everyone's time to arrive to a venue. I would have to travel internationally. Caitlin would have to travel internationally. It would be a much bigger deal, right? And it's not really necessary for this conversation. We can have this conversation by video. And yes, maybe it's not quite as nice and quite as good as doing it in person, but it's getting us at least kind of 80% there at like 10% of the effort and the cost. So that, you have to do this equation of, in this case, maybe that works. Maybe that's better. Maybe we also then want to, arrange a physical conference where we can all talk about these things in greater depth. And we want to do that once a year. And that's a wonderful thing. And I'm not saying don't do that. Just like I'm not saying don't ever do a human courier scenario. If you're transporting, something that's like the crown jewels of your institution, then by all means. But maybe you want additional, maybe you still want to use a platform like this, where you now have everything documented and stored and in one place for everyone's reference, because you want to do all the bells and whistles for this treasure thing. Or maybe there's some things, in the middle where you say, you know what, we're not going to go to all that effort of doing all the bells and whistles. We're just going to do a human, for this. We're going to do a not human for that. I think it goes back to Caitlin's point about blanket policies and moving on to be a little bit more nuanced and case by case with how we do things.
Okayama Monomoko, you're interested.
Yeah, well, I'm like totally convinced that the virtual couriers gonna be very helpful, and it's really great to see the potential of reducing the travel, especially. And it's a yes or no question. Is it available also if you're outside of Europe and UK?
Oh yes, yeah, globally.
Yeah, so the app is ready for use for either like locally in a country. Like I come from Japan, so I just want to know if it's, yeah, like you can just directly implement. It's just, I guess, a language barrier, but yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. We work
Okay.
with institutions all over the globe.
But probably it is available only in English, or
Well, so Articheck as a platform is kind of in progress with supporting multiple languages. So we have, for example, you can do a condition report in up to 8 languages. However, it's like there's different levels of templates that have been translated for each of those languages. So what that means is that at least the base, most simple templates have been translated in all 8 of those languages, which currently does include Chinese, but not Japanese. And we also have we don't have Dutch. I have to tell you, sorry about that. We have German, Italian, Portuguese.
and there's so many of us.
I know.
Well,
but
I took the
that's
time to learn
interesting.
Dutch, and it has been very helpful.
Yeah, maybe Caitlin can help us with the translation for our Dutch speakers. But
I was just wondering, is there anyone out here in the room who has had experience with virtual
careering.
Those are really
No one at all? That's interesting.
That is interesting.
We have actually at Museum Gouda, no less. So, Martje from Groningen Museum, put on your camera and tell us about it.
And you've done it a lot. That's good to hear.
Yeah. Where are you? Martje? Martje? We'd love to hear your story.
And there's someone else, but their
It looks like
name
there's
is
some
administrator.
technicians. Yeah. But Semka, you said you do it at Museum Gouda a lot.
Well, yeah, we have had a few instances, but as I'm not involved myself, I honestly don't know how this goes in practice, which is silly, but I don't know. Martje, there you are.
Sorry.
No worries. Tell us about your experiences.
Yeah, we use online courier. We use it a lot, mostly for loans further away, but also sometimes in the Netherlands for smaller museums that we don't have the time to travel there. And then because we are in Groningen and all the travel time is like, 2+ hours. So yeah, we use it and it works. But sometimes we also call it art TV because you're just watching what other people are doing. So yeah, but it's nice.
So, do you
Yeah.
just film sort of the hanging process of the whole A to Z trajectory?
Yeah, from unpacking until it's on the wall and secured. But sometimes during the process, you can see that the team, the art handling team, is very adequate, and then you feel like, okay, it's okay. We did the condition check together. You told me if there are any changes, you can hang it by yourself. It depends every time.
Yeah.
I think that's a good point about confidence and your feeling, and again it goes back to this whole trust thing, but also documentation. So if you're doing one of the drawbacks of streaming, the sort of art TV that you're talking about, is that A, it's not recorded if there is an incident, if something does happen, but B, I don't know how many people are aware of this, but streaming technology prioritizes audio. So depending on the internet connection of both parties, sometimes the image quality is not very good. But if you instead are taking video, but just taking like short video to show the thing, to kind of focus on the thing that you're talking about, and then the person on the other side is reviewing that short video, then the image quality will be much superior. So that's why we chose to do it that way in our system.
Interesting. I was just looking back in the chat and I found this interesting comment by Annette Welkamp. I think as part of, there you are, yeah, as part of Caitlin's presentation, about the difference between larger or smaller museums in implementing climate control changes, but maybe also other developments. Annette, would you like to expand?
Goedemiddag. I'm just wary. I can imagine, you've got a curator, a director, and an education staff member, and then you have a fabulous collection, and you've got loan requests, or you're dealing with your own collection. It's very hard then for you to, you're doing other things. You're not a conservator, so where there aren't the dedicated staff to deal with these changes, it's always easier to have a little table and you can measure, what the standards are, which is how we've done it always in the past. But just, yes, once the institution has fewer staff members, I can imagine taking newer options each time is probably beyond capacity. So in terms of expertise, but also in terms of time. So yes, I'm sort of not fulfilling, expanding on my question, to be quite honest, but that's...
No, but it's interesting. And I think Arya, if you're still out there.
I don't think so.
Yes, I am. But maybe Tjetske wants to answer.
No. Go on, Arya.
Well, I also answered in the chat earlier that I think in the smaller museums we are also more flexible. And of course, we don't have the experience of the bigger museums, and we often experience difficulties in getting things on loan because of our climate conditions. Someone else said building is not really helping, and the same for us. We also had digital couriers, by the way. Rijksmuseum used it several times, and we have good experience, although our volunteers get pretty nervous when someone is watching them hanging things on the wall. Maybe you can imagine, although it's digital. So we have the laptop standing on a kind of on the stairs. So that they can watch. I think as a smaller museum, we really like the things are going to be maybe more realistic, because we often bump into lots of problems getting things on loan. Lots of hesitations from bigger institutions, and it's harder and harder for us to get things on loan. Although we care for what we receive very, very well, and we never had any problem there.
I really loved the word you used there, which was realistic. And one of the conversations that we have quite often when it comes to climate control, but this is also, of course, relevant for loans and virtual courier and really any work that we do in museums, is moving away from this idea of having to be perfect or ideal conditions and moving towards realistic or necessary. It is not realistic for all of the museums to be doing everything perfectly, but we have this kind of pressure on ourselves to do so. And I think, Tjetske, this is really what you were discussing about. You're not going to video something that's not perfect, because that's culturally not okay. But we need to understand that we're all human and that we're all doing the best we can. And I think that maybe some of that transparency can also start to help build trust and also make more progressive conversations. So I really like that. Thank you, Arya.
I'd like to just add, if I may, too, that another really important point for us all to kind of come back to as conservators is, like, we want to facilitate loans happening, right? Sometimes I think people get so concerned over risk managing that we kind of sometimes forget about, the fact that if people don't get to see and enjoy objects, then what kind of is the point of it all, right?
Why are we doing what we're doing?
Collection. Yeah.
I think on the one hand, it's perfect timing and a beautiful ending, but I also saw an interesting question by Mireille from the Van Gogh Museum, and I love that for us in Holland, of course, the Krullenmuller and Van Gogh Museum are the bigger museums and also the more difficult loan partners, I may say. May I say this? So I think it's wonderful that they're here in the room with us, and I'd love to hear your story, Mireille, and your concerns, because of course they're real as well. And there's a reason that we're not all, completely letting go of any boundaries that we used to have. Mireille, could you maybe repeat your question and maybe expand on it a bit? Trying to get a camera on. Thanks, that's great. For those of you who have to leave, thanks for being here. And also we will be sharing the video and your links and more information on Caitlin and Annika's companies on our website and also LinkedIn. So follow us also for future online ICOM talks, because I love them. I hope you do too. Mireille.
Yes, hi. I'm very interested in looking to get the guidelines a little bit broader, but I'm also very worried about things that are building up, the damages building up slowly, and you only see that on the long term. So we can do a lot of testing with broadening the standards and the climate, but you can't always see the damages that happen on a long period of time.
It's a really, really good question, and I don't have a short answer for you, which is unfortunate. But this is a valid concern. I think that first of all, we have to define what we mean by damages. Are we talking about flaking of paint? Are we talking about warping of canvas? Are we talking about mold growth? What kind of damage are we concerned about? And then we have to think about, once again, what is actually happening in our contexts and what is happening in our collections. So I've been to the Van Gogh Museum, of course, millions of times as, someone who worked across the street, across the grass, I should say. You guys have a beautiful museum and a very new. So I don't think that the mold issue would be really of a concern. And then also, of course, you have collections that were created in a time before HVAC systems. So you have the proofed fluctuations. And so I think that in your context, it would certainly merit having conversations, but it seems to me that there's also probably more room for discussions, because you have such a safe building, and you also have proof fluctuations with your artworks. Sorry, Annika, you wanted to add to that, and then I'll keep
I would, as the conservator technologist in the room, I would just like to add that one of the things that I'm talking about actively with my team, and I'm really interested and excited about in the context of AI that was brought up earlier, right? One of the good uses that we could put AI to is looking, and again, also one of the positive things about going digital and documenting these things would be if you can more closely monitor things moving forward. So you can maybe start to see those minor changes. And if we're all kind of documenting things in a standardized way, and we can analyze, with greater depth, what is really going on, what happens when we do relax conditions, and how does that affect things moving forward. So, we can start to, compare images of artwork as it travels and as it has greater relaxed conditions, and start to look at with AI and sensors and different things can help us to even greater than the human eye can detect variables and changes in terms of this crack has expanded after it's been going on a touring exhibition, not as much even as my human eye can see, but maybe by a tiny little fraction. And what does that mean to us? Does that mean we don't want to lend it anymore? Does that mean that we only want to lend it in these very specific circumstances? We want to create a microenvironment for it. Once we have more data, then we can start to ask better questions. And AI is a tool that can help us to analyze and to ask questions. And I'm excited for the future of being able to do that better.
Yeah, and I think the other aspect of this is the idea of what is long term as well. And we're thinking if we look at like CCI and their definition of the agents of deterioration, and there are certain things that if we're talking about a 500-year lifespan, 1 degree might make a difference of 5 years in terms of slowing damage down. I mean, we know that objects are always changing. We can't keep them in the status that they are right now forever because that's just not realistic. They're materials and they're going to change the physics of it. That's the chemistry of it. But what we're obviously trying to do with preventive conservation is we're trying to slow that process down. Now, one of the things, and this is my personal opinion, but one of the things that always makes it a little bit more contextualized for me is the fact that, if we're not okay with changing 1 or 2 degrees and maybe losing 5 years of an object's life, but we're actually okay with, destroying the planet while we're doing it, and then there's not going to be a planet to house our objects on, that makes it a little bit challenging. And the fact of the matter, and this is my most controversial opinion, so please take this with a grain of salt, but I actually feel that based on the conservation science of this, based on this concept of proof fluctuations, the idea that objects are in perfect conditions, or that objects are okay being exposed to conditions that they've previously been exposed to, means that the biggest threat for our collections is actually climate change. It's actually these new climate parameters that we've never experienced before. It's the more extreme weather conditions. It's the freezing, it's the heat, it's the humidity that these objects have never experienced. So my most controversial opinion is that actually what we should be doing, instead of keeping our objects in these idealized perfect conditions and contributing to what is actually the biggest risk and the biggest threat to our collections, is that we should be looking at expanding and acclimating the objects to their new realities, which is going to be even wider parameters than this plus or minus 10. But by doing that in a really controlled and really safe way, that's how we can best protect our objects. So I know that's very radical.
Here, here. No, I think that's a very pragmatic and realistic view of things, because I think it's a very good point that the unfortunate reality of our future and our world is that we are going to have increasing number of environmental related issues that these collections are going to have to deal with one way or the other. So, how do we deal with preventative care for that thing that is going to happen?
Yeah, and if we look at it, I mean, Gael always says climate and climate in general, so temperature and relative humidity, are just 2 of 66 different parameters of preventive conservation. And he said that the reality of it is that they're 2 of the least important ones. But the reason that we're so obsessed with them is because we can control them. And we can't control if a bulldozer, comes and runs over our fresco, or if, a comet falls from the sky and blows up our museum. But then at the same time, we're trying so hard to control it, it's actually backfiring in a lot of situations. I mean, look at the museum in Brazil. The fire that happened was because of the HVAC system. So we need to think a little bit more about where we're putting our energy, and that's both our personal energy and our actual energy.
I think this is a good point to round off our wonderful session. Thank you so much, Caitlin and Annika. About 35 people have had to leave just before now, but they've all said thank you, and loved it and learned so much. And I think as sort of closing words, I totally agree with both of you. We all want our art to have an audience. We want loans to happen. We want our art to survive. And we're all the custodians of our heritage, but maybe look at it a different way. Art objects are like people. That's a good one too. I mean, you need context. It's all about context, and broadening our scope. And you've really helped us, I think, or me at least, in doing that. So thank you so much. For all of you, look on our website if you want to share with colleagues or to check something after. We will post the video and also share it and share the information of Annika and Caitlin, so you can email them or get to know more about what they offer to help your museums. Thank you so much. See you next time at an ICOM talk, and have a lovely day in
Thank
the
you
snow.
so much, everyone. Fijne dag.
everyone. Bye.
Bye bye.